Good Wednesday morning, everybody, and welcome on into today's FreightWaves Now Community Spotlight. I'm Kaylee Nix, and it's Wednesday, so it is time to talk truck tech with the one and only Alan Adler. And Alan, we know that you are back in the travel saddle right now. You were with Jen Rumsey last week at Cummins. This week, you are visiting another one of our favorite companies to talk about. Give us a little bit of an update on your visit with Workhorse.
Well, it's interesting that actually has already occurred, and what you're going to see today is a little different approach to truck tech, Kaylee. Where actually it's more of a package on the plant, because going to Workhorse means going all the way to Union City, Indiana. I almost said Ohio because it's that close to Ohio, literally a couple farm fields apart. But this plant is old, or was old. It's been refurbished to the tune of about $34 million. Workhorse, which is really, having some issues financially and has had them for some time. My thought when Rick Dowk came in as CEO about 2 years ago was that because he came out of Delphi Technologies, which had just been sold for like $3.3 billion to Borg Warner. My thought was they hired Rick to come in and just take Workhorse apart, sell it off for parts. That is absolutely not what he's done. He basically started over down there. He stopped the production of the truck that the previous administration had started, and he started from scratch. He paused the plant for 6 months, didn't lay anybody off, but had them work on the renovation of this plant. And it just seemed like a place we ought to go check out because, we've covered Workhorse forever. And, they were a meme stock. They've had a lot of things going on there if you think about it. Now they're actually in production, albeit slowly, of a class 5 and 6 called the W56 step van, electric step van. And so we got a chance to talk to the folks at the plant. We talked to Rick Dowk himself over in Indianapolis. But what we've seen this in the show later today is, and again, hat tip to South Turk for pulling all this together. But what you'll see is hopefully a decently assembled piece that looks at the plant as well as the business.
So we know that, as you mentioned, Rick was really tasked with kind of righting the ship at Workhorse when he stepped in, and nobody was quite sure what was going to happen, what their future would entail. There was a little bit of drama that happened, right? There was the lawsuit with the Postal Service over whether or not their van was going to be used, which of course they ended up going with Oshkosh instead. That was inevitably dropped. Now, of course, we see is the stock doing well enough to continue to take them on their current trajectory, or are they going to have to reevaluate their different course of action? What does this look like kind of from a steer the ship perspective for Rick, and how has he really fared in the last kind of year or so since getting it on the right path?
Well, it's interesting. I had a terrific interview with him a year ago at the ACT Expo in at the time in Anaheim, and I was stunned at just how candid he was. He said, "Look," he said, "if it goes to zero, it goes to zero." He said, "But there's every chance that we can make a go of this. We can come up with a product that is good and is something that people want." And I think they have that. But what we've got, sort of the latest headwind, if you will, for Workhorse is the fact that there's a slowdown in electric vehicles. And part of that is because of the delay in implementing the Advanced Clean Fleets rule, which basically, creates a market for electric vehicles, especially in California and in the states that will follow. But right now that rule is not being implemented. So people are holding off a bit on orders and things like that. So Workhorse actually just today, I believe, or maybe it was yesterday, did some financing, got some probably equity for cash kind of thing. It'll dilute shareholders a bit. But at this point, with a stock trading around 30 cents a share, give or take, they need more cash. So the stock price doesn't really indicate their cash situation. But they only had about $25 million at the end of the year. This, I think, got them around $139 million, a little bit of breathing room. But again, they're on the bubble, Kaylee. They really are. It doesn't mean that the effort that they've undertaken is insignificant, because now the plant, which they put the money into, they can sell it for that and then lease it back. And that's one of the things that they listed in their 10K last week, was that, they're in the process of doing that to raise some money there. They've done layoffs, which while they didn't do it while they were remaking the plant, they have laid off about 20% of their 120 or so employees. Executives have deferred some of their cash compensation until the second quarter. So, it's definitely battened down the hatches time at Workhorse. But I guess I feel like having met Rick, known his father, who was also a longtime manufacturing guy, originally, came out of Chrysler and General Motors. Rick is one of these guys. If anyone's going to make this work, it's going to be a Rick Dowd.
So, Alan, you mentioned that this episode of Truck Tech is kind of unique because you guys also go down and visit the actual plant itself. And I love that because I think oftentimes we kind of get stuck into this like interview cycle of like CEO, an important space, video to video, right? And we never really highlight some of those folks who are on the ground doing the work and who are really in those trenches. Can you talk a little bit about visiting the plant and kind of how it was that different approach and what you ended up seeing or learning that's different than just talking to someone like a Rick Dowd, who's awesome, but getting to get down with the actual folks in Workhorse?
A little bit of my thinking was I thought that, since it was Work Truck Week recently and we were going to see Rick there, I thought, well, the guy's good enough to do another podcast with, because he's that good. You might still see 5 minutes in the newsletter with him. I'm kind of trying to decide what I want to do with my 5 minutes piece this week. But I'll tell you that actually meeting up with the folks who are doing the work on the ground at Workhorse, it's exhilarating in this sense, Kelly. Since retiring from the daily business of, writing 6 or 7 stories a week, I can put a little more time into this. I can do a little bit of travel. I can go see what's really going on out there. And when you talk to the people who are doing the work, you pick up a lot of things, at least from a body language perspective and maybe just general knowledge of being able to lean over and look at something and say, well, what does that do? Or how does this work? So with a video camera, or call it an iPhone with a nice stabilizer, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to look at things a little differently, last week we went to Pittsburgh and we actually got our first ride in an autonomous truck. I was able to take the camera in there and actually shoot it as it's going around. We used that on in the newsletter last week, embedded about 2 minutes of this. And it's amazing. You don't get that sitting here talking like you and I are talking now. This is pleasurable enough, but I get your point and I agree with you.
Was there anything being there in the ground and talking to some of the folks who were there in the plant that really surprised you, or any stories that you think are worth diving maybe a little bit deeper into?
Well, it's funny. I don't know if she'll make the final cut. It really depends, because we're still sort of working on what we're going to put on up on YouTube later today. But I met with one of the women who works in the paint area. Everything in the Workhorse plant is manual. There are no robots in there. Everything is literally hand built. At this point, it's about 5 vehicles a day. They could get up to, on 2 shifts, 10,000 vehicles a year at some point. I mean, right now they don't have the orders to support that. But, they're still in the early stages. I think they built about 50 or 60 of the W56 vans. And at this point, you just see workers who really come off of the farm communities in the area, because for, Troy, closest city to Union City is Muncie, Indiana, which is where Ball State's located. So a lot of these folks are coming in literally off the farms and working at this plant. And at one time, Rick Dock was telling me, there were 8,000 people in the area and 1,000 of them worked at the plant. Well, that's not the case anymore. But he said, if I could get us back to that point, he said, that would be a really nice topper to my career. He said to rebuild a community that way. So I didn't get a lot of personal stories from people, but they've done a lot of interesting things around theming at the plant. Everything is sort of a ranch theme. Made me think of Yellowstone for some reason, the TV show. I don't know why, but they've named everything. The plant is the barn. They literally have a horse farm on the property that they use, and there's an area, a farmer that brings horses in for their meetings and things like that, with investors and so forth. So, they kind of have the whole package there in a very remote area.
Feels like a story in good old blue collar American manufacturing. And Alan, we love that you are the one that gets to tell that. So for folks who want to catch Truck Tech, either the show or the newsletter, where can they go to do that?
Okay, 3:00 Eastern today. It will do you call it air, Kaylee? I'm not even sure. It'll stream on YouTube, and then it'll live there under the FreightWaves channel. And you look at shows, and then you go to Truck Tech, and you'll get a playlist there. And so it'll live there after it airs. And then Friday's newsletter is 11:00 Eastern. Can't go too much into that. I'm starting to work on something that honestly is embargoed, so I really can't talk about it today. But we have a few other items in there. We'll try to make sure, again, the goal is not to do a repeat of what you do on the podcast, but to come up with clean, fresh content. And I guarantee you we'll do that.
There you go. And head on over, subscribe to Truck Tech if you don't already. And Alan, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Kaylee. Bye-bye.